Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Metal Perspective 2025. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to join us to talk about trends in metal and manufacturing for the year ahead. My name is Mike Carrazzo. I'm the content manager here at Ryerson, joined by Frank Williams. Frank.
Hi, everybody. Frank Williams, General Manager of E-commerce, Marketing, and Communications at Ryerson.
So we thought we'd spend a little bit of time here talking about the results of a survey that we do twice annually called the Metal Perspective. What we do is we try to gauge the pulse of our customers, manufacturers, fabricators, job shops about how they feel about macroeconomic conditions going forward, business conditions, metal spending habits, and it really paints a pretty good picture. I think aligns pretty well with what goes on in the marketplace. As we always do, we ask our survey respondents right off the bat, how are they feeling about the year ahead? It can either be very strong, pessimistic, or neutral. And if you look at this year's results, 57% kind of fell into that. They're optimistic, 30% kind of neutral. Combined, that's an overwhelming 87% feeling pretty good about the year ahead. That leaves roughly about 13% pessimistic. It was kind of flipped last year, much less optimistic going into the year. You saw some of it pull back even more midway point, but you could call it cautiously optimistic, but I think you have a better description for what you think people are thinking.
Yeah, I think people are really viewing this as, hey, I see things getting better this year. There's probably two fundamental reasons behind that, but beyond just the simple, am I going to be stable? Am I going to be up? One of the things we really found is a lot of turmoil underneath that, and a lot of reasons why people might see some uncertainty, even though they kind of look far ahead and think, well, this year should be better than last year for, both demand reasons and maybe, policy reasons. They also know that that's going to probably come with some short-term, we'll call it like pain or discomfort as we move through the year.
One of the questions we asked about is where do they see the biggest growth opportunity for 2025? And I think overwhelmingly, everyone is looking at expanding their customer base. I don't want to say that's surprising, but if you're optimistic going into the year, that's got to be some of the tailwinds driving you, right? Customer growth. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when you have such a strong conviction that this is going to be a good year, I'm interested in finding out, okay, where's that growth going to come from? And so you're exactly right. Expanding the customer base was the strongest in all of our categories. So whether you're a manufacturer, a fabricator, or a job shop, every one of them said that was the number one way they were going to grow. What was interesting, though, was job shops. So the folks that maybe don't have as clear a line of sight on exactly what's going to happen in the year, they were most interested in expanding their customer base. So They looked at that as really the primary reason. And, I think as we go further into the data, one of the things we saw, if you flip-flop to another one of the questions we asked was, what constraints do they have on their business? And we saw, again, they all kind of line up relatively similarly as far as their number one is cost and margin control. And then beyond that, it was labor. And you can see again where the job shops really stand out here is they view that as almost as big as an issue as costs and margin. And so I think what you're seeing here is for some of these job shops, what they're facing is they're probably a lot more dependent on the few people that they might have in their organization. The skilled labor is tough to come by. And so unlike a manufacturer who may have more resources or more ways to move people around, they really don't. And I think that might be hampering their ability to grow. And so they really see it as, I've got to expand my base. If you dug even further into that, what we saw was a problem was they weren't really innovating and going after new products or services. They were the least likely to do that.
The job right?
Yeah, the job as far as how they were going to progress their business. So kind of interesting, so what we're seeing from our different customer bases.
Yeah, and in that regard, fabricators were looking pretty strongly at entering new markets. Does that seem to stick out? Does that speak to maybe manufacturers outsourcing some of that more, or fabricators looking to kind of pick up that business? Do you think that could be an indication there?
Yeah, it definitely could be. I think the other thing we saw in the survey results were there were particular end markets that seemed really strong. So I mentioned earlier that there were kind of two things like tariffs and policy and maybe a more open administration. The other thing we really saw was demand, particularly in some subsegments. So you could see data centers, aerospace, Pharma was mentioned in there. There are some areas that seem to be particularly attractive. And I think that's what we're seeing there too, is maybe a shift from what they might have been doing last year or the year before into some of these hotter markets, given that they're coming into the year with a pretty strong tailwind.
So we talked about the challenges, we talked about the opportunities. That all kind of leads to, where does this all go? How much metal are they buying, right? What's the metal spend? And it's interesting, as you saw about last year, about the midway point, when we asked this question about what do you think your increase in metal spend is going to be? At the beginning of the year, 2024, majority, about 64% says they're going to increase, or they're going to maintain. That fell down to about 46 at the midway point, as you'll see some stats on your screen here. Whereas 27% were going to increase at the beginning of the year. That fell to a modest 22. But I think the biggest jump was 11% at the beginning of 2024. So they're going to decrease their spend in metal. That hit 31 by the middle point. So that could speak to the uncertainty once you got to that middle of the year, right? I mean, things changed. Even who might be in office was going to change at that time, right? So, but if you look this year, that those plans that increase spending has once again trickled up, and you think I think it could be. I mean, to me, when you look at the data, it just speaks to certainty, right? And we have some certainty, I guess, at the moment. But is that fair to say a good path to follow for that data?
Yeah, if you look at the arc of the story last year, right? So you're entering a year with an election in it, obviously. And at the beginning of the year, it looked like there were two candidates that were going to be set to go. And then as we got to the middle part of the year, the candidate, as we were having that survey, looking back on it, another interesting time to be serving our customers. What's interesting about the metal perspective in this is it really triangulates well with what we hear from our customers through our salespeople. And what we heard then was, oh my gosh, uncertainty and lots of projects being kind of put off until the November to December timeframe. Mm-hmm. And that was not the case in the beginning part of the year. So you saw that optimism really wane, and that showed up again in how much their metal spend was going to change through, the end of the year. What we're seeing now in the 2025 results is something very different than we saw even at early point last year. We see people following up on the optimism they had in the first question that we talked about, all the way through to what they're going to spend on their metal. And you can see that coming through. It's pretty pervasive that they really anticipate that their business is going to grow. Again, I think there's some uncertainty how they get there, but they know along the way they're going to need more metal and other products that are going to help them make what they essentially sell out to their customers.
Absolutely.